Today it's a Friday, and I'm your host, Jasper Mangwana, the President for Internet Society Zimbabwe. Today we're talking on a very rare topic, which a lot of people may not really understand where we're coming from and where we're going. But I hope after this session you might understand exactly what we're talking about. Today we want to talk about internet exchange points. We have had so many telecommunication sectors and the people who are actually working on the internet, they're sharing their opinions and their views on internet exchange points. So I want to understand what exactly are internet exchange points, and also why are they so important to the internet ecosystems in Zimbabwe and beyond. So joining us today for this very important conversation, we've got Nomsa Mwangi, who's a partner engineer with Facebook. Welcome to the show, Nomsa.
Thank you, Jasper.
Thanks so much. We also joined with the director for technology with the Internet Society all the way from across Africa, Mr. Michuki. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jasper. Happy to be here.
Thanks so much. We were also joined with Keith Rose. He's a network specialist who's been in the telecommunications industry for a long time. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Thanks, Jasper.
We also joined with Mr. Mtengwa, who's the IT manager with the Postal and Telecommunications Authority of Zimbabwe. Welcome to the show, Mr. Boni.
Thank you, Jasper. It's nice to be here.
Great. Without taking much time, we would want our panelists to have a presentation of 10 to 15 minutes on their journey and what they think is very important for each and every one of us to understand today. So as you all know that, March we've been celebrating the Women's Month, and always in Africa we say ladies first. So I'll take that note today and have a note to start with the presentation, and then we get Michuki and Keith followed by Bonnie, and then we open up questions. For our viewers, if you have any questions, you can post them on our social media handles, and those that have the link to our Zoom meeting can also join. Over to you, Madam Nomsa.
Thank you very much, Jasper, and I'm really happy and excited to be here. This is a very important topic, and like you rightly said, a lot of people only see the effects of not having exchange points or having exchange points, and a lot of the underground information and what goes on and what actually constitutes an IXP is not really widely known. So thank you once again for inviting me, and hi everyone. Hopefully today we can learn. There are a lot of experts in our panel, so I'm also here to learn a lot more. So I've been involved in IXPs only on the technical aspects of it, helping out with the IXP in Zimbabwe at some point. So I'm going to give a very short presentation, which might help somebody who is a novice to understand an IXP. So I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Very clear.
Okay, great. All right, this is Mad Jane, and I'm sure you can see she's really, really mad. So Jane has been told that in order for her to sort out her financial crisis, she just needed to be online to trade her Bitcoins for a few minutes because of a specific event. And when she tried to connect, she actually initially connected, and then she found that she couldn't actually carry on with the transaction. And after a few minutes, she actually discovered that her internet link was down. And like anyone, she phoned the ISP, who then told her, unfortunately, they had to wait for someone to fix a cable somewhere. So obviously, Jane was not too thrilled. And just as much as you thought Jane is mad, then we have Tom. Tom actually dropped out of university to explore gaming, and he got very good at it. Tom was actually very well known in his country as one of the best gamers, and apparently was also competing against the best of the best in the world and smashing them. So Tom wanted to make sure that he pays his dues to his parents, who had actually sold their house to take him to university. So he entered a competition which was going to win, possibly help him to win $1 million to sort out his problems and also to pay out his parents. But unfortunately for Tom, he realized all his reactions were slow. I'm sure most of you who know about gaming would know that a second is worth 1,000. It could be worth losing or winning. So obviously, if you have high latency, that doesn't really work well for you. So let's look at what happens in an environment where we have an inefficient ecosystem, which results in users having very poor quality of service and ultimately having very bad experiences. We'll start with Tom because he looked more furious. Tom is in country A, and instead of traffic being routed to his gaming competition server, which is also in the same country, it's going around through a transit provider in a different country, and then the traffic is being routed back down to the gaming competition host. So as you can see, there's 149 milliseconds. This is not very optimal for the kind of game that he's playing. He needs like sub 10 milliseconds, but he couldn't achieve that because for those of you who are a bit technical, you know that more the distance means more hops, and that distance creates a lag in the round trip time a packet takes to go to and from a specific source to a destination. And likewise, we're going to look at what was going on behind the scenes in Jane's case. So Jane was actually, her ISP, which is ISP1 here, is transiting via two transit providers for reasons best known to transit provider B, who is the first provider for the ISP. And by the time the traffic gets to ISP2, anything can happen in between. But the fact that these are directly connected means if there is a break, for example, here, then any customers that are being routed by transit provider B will lose connectivity. So let's look at an ideal scenario. So if you have an IXP, which I'm sure you can see, that's the new introduction, a little IXP there in Tom's case, and you see a smile on Tom's face because now he's able to achieve 8 milliseconds, which he wanted. I mean, it can get better, but the reason is now that Tom's ISP is connected to an IXP within the country, and the content is coming from a gaming provider in the same country, and they're also connected to the IXP. This means that the distribution of traffic is both closer and it's closer to the end user. And obviously this has an implication, a positive implication in terms of the quality of experience. And as you can see, Tom is happy. And unfortunately, this is not what happened. He just couldn't make it. And let's talk about what's happening in Jane's scenario. If we were to fix what was going on there, we see that, of course, now there's an introduction of an IXP. And I've also just put a carrier neutral co-location, a CNC, just to indicate the importance of that neutrality and accessibility within a carrier neutral co-location facility. But what's important now is we have multi-parts, which means ISP1 is not limited to the parts that are provided by their transit provider. They can connect to the IXP and literally have more options for them to route their traffic to their destination. So, which brings us to exactly what is an IXP, an Internet Exchange Point. It actually boils down to 3 basic things. The first is a network, the second is a handshake, and the third is a secure location. And when we talk of networks, it's just the physical media that's connecting, that's interconnecting, and the handshake is some sort of agreement or a contract. And of course, this is happening in a specific location, ideally a carrier neutral data center or POP. So what does it take to create an IXP? It's a very important question to ask, because a lot of times people think there's a very, they probably think it's the other way around. Actually, 80% of it is social engineering. People gathering around, understanding their problems, the problems they face as communities, and discussing about ways in which they could be sorted out. Obviously, this means putting a different stakeholders together. And of course, 20% is just the technical part of it, setting up, configuring, putting your security and all of that. It only just constitutes 20%. So we talked about multi-stakeholders. You cannot build an IXP alone. It involves a lot of people. I've only just put 4 examples here. There's much more than that. So there's regulators, the government, service providers, data centers, enterprises, educational facilities, financial institutions, you name it. People have different needs, and an IXP is there to serve anyone who's got vested interest in traffic, especially traffic that's mostly going to be beneficial being routed locally. So this diagram has some sort of depiction. This is not, it's probably not the full picture. There could be much more IXPs here, but we have some IXPs that are dotted around Africa, and there's still a lot of gaps, and there's much more potential for us to build IXPs, and not only build IXPs, but ensure that IXPs are built and scaled, and they get to a maturity level where all the stakeholders really get to benefit from them. And this IXP life cycle was actually developed by ISOC. They will probably have a very good explanation on this, but in any case, we have the different stages of an IXP, starting from 0 IXP to an early stage, and then going to a mature stage. Then when you look at the success metrics of an IXP, you want to start with the most important. Establishing an IXP is a metric on its own, because then you start to have a foundation of what you can build up on. And then, of course, you develop and scale it, and you assess the impact, and also make sure that the cost makes sense, both for the consumers of the services, and also for the IXP itself. So I'm not going to cover much. I know there's not so much time, but if there are any questions, I am willing to answer them. And if not, I think we've got a question and answer session right at the end. So I'm also willing to answer any questions that come up at the end. So thanks for giving me the chance to share this. Back to you, Jasper.
Thank you so much, Nomsa. That's a very powerful presentation there about Jane and James, and I think it really appeals to even the layman who would understand where you're coming from, and you're going the way, saying that this guy is very much interested in gaming, but unfortunately he wants to compete with someone who's running the same game in the US. So in terms of the speeds and where the content is available, it's an issue. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Nomsa. And I think you're one of the few ladies we are very much looking to inspire many more women to be in technology, especially aspects of infrastructure and engineering. Thanks so much. I think our next panelist will bring in Mr. Michuki, who is with Internet Society, to share with us. Over and above that, we know very well that SADC has been running a forum on internet exchange points this past week, which is actually ending today. Mr. Michuki, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jasper, and good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. So I will try and build on a couple of things that NOMSA has done an excellent job in introducing. Basically, what I'm going to talk about is how IXPs really serve as an anchor for the development of the local internet ecosystem. So before I go into that, I just want to do a quick overview of one of the projects which is focusing on IXP development rather focusing on IXP development at the Internet Society. And the project is called Infrastructure and Community Development Project. So this project has basically an understanding that for us to be able to build a better and more resilient internet, then we also need strong local and technical communities. And so the focus really is looking at how we can develop not just the infrastructure, but also the people who are actually involved in building, maintaining, and operating those technical infrastructure and the internet, so that everyone can be able to benefit from the resource itself. So the project has two components. One is on infrastructure, which basically looks at building and supporting internet exchange points. And the second component is on the community component of the development, which is basically working with the individuals, the experts in the local technical community, helping them create a forum where they can share ideas and experiences, and enable them to sort of create the relevant pools and skill sets that are needed to operate the internet infrastructure in that respective market, and also at the sub-regional level and at the regional level. So we do this work across the 6 regions of the world, and we have subject matter experts that are based in those regions that help us in executing that work. So if you like to reach out to us, please feel free to go to our website and you'll find more information. I'm one of the subject matter experts covering Africa, and I'm helped with a colleague called Gila, and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have. So diving into IXPs, I think NOMSA has done an excellent job in trying to explain what an IXP is. So I'll really not spend a lot of time going through what it is. Just in one of my slides, I want you to just take a moment and see that picture in terms of what an IXP is able to do. When we say that an internet exchange point is able to be an anchor for the development of the local internet ecosystem, this is sort of what picture we try and to sort of present so that people can try and imagine what that means. It means that in your local internet ecosystem, you'll have all these stakeholders coming together, interconnecting, enabling the end user, which is yourself, to actually have access to content from the closest, most efficient point possible. So I think there's some noise in the background. If someone could mute that. Thank you. So, so in being able to create that ecosystem, it takes some bit of work. As NOMSA just presented, it's 80% social engineering, 20% technical. And why do we say that? So if you look at this image, you will see that we are connecting one ISP, or your ISP, to another ISP, a local CDN with another local CDN, an international CDN with another international CDN. So basically you're asking traditional competitors, or natural competitors, if you will, to come together and interconnect for the benefit of all. Now, it takes some time for people to actually come to terms to understand what that actually means, because it just doesn't stop at when they interconnect or they connect to the exchange point. That's just like the initial step, is walk into the door, connect your network to that exchange. It's now the subsequent engagement or involvement that is needed to actually help grow that internet exchange point, which is basically the ecosystem around the internet exchange point, to a point that it gets to be as interesting, as dynamic, as valuable as what you see in this picture. Because I believe if you're in Zimbabwe and you wanted to access all the content, looking at the images that are the picture that you're seeing in front of you, if all those networks were connected locally in Zimbabwe, then the internet experience will be likely very different. The cost per megabit in Zimbabwe is likely to be very different. And also it means that you probably have a very good internet experience overall, which allows you then to be able to contribute or participate in that, not just being as a consumer, but also enable you the opportunity to also become a creator and contribute to the growth of the internet ecosystem in your respective country. So NOMSA has talked about the number of exchange points, so I'll skip this as well. But one of the things which I wanted to mention on this slide is that one of the exchange points is in Southern Africa, NAP Africa, is now among the top 10 largest IXPs in the world, with over 450 networks connected. So if you think this is not a reality, if you go to NAP Africa in Joburg, you will be very surprised to find there are more than 400 networks connected to that internet exchange point. And that's just incredible. If you look at SADC itself, there are 16 member states, 13 of them have IXPs, and there are 2 countries that don't have, and one that's trying to revive its efforts because there was an IXP and has had a couple of challenges, and the exchange point is not working, and they're trying to revive it. So let's take a quick look at the peering and interconnection ecosystem. Who are those stakeholders that NOMSA was mentioning? There are quite a number of them, and you could look at it from different ways, but essentially you build that ecosystem by bringing all these stakeholders together so that they can start having those deliberate conversations around what do we need to do. They're both local, they're both local and international. They need to come together. A lot of what they do is very much interdependent, meaning that they depend on each other for their success. So for instance, for a CDN to come, an international CDN, to set up a shop in Zimbabwe or in Harare for that matter, then they need the presence of a carrier neutral data center. If there is none, they are less likely to be able to set up in that market. If you have a regional ISP, for instance, Work Online or Liquid Telecom, or some other large regional operator or service provider that wants to come and connect, then one of the places they would like to first connect to is the internet exchange point. If you don't have an internet exchange point, it becomes difficult. If you're a hosting provider, then you need the infrastructure, which is the carrier neutral data centers. But you also need local eyeballs. So you need a diversity of local ISPs that are bringing those users to a facility where you can easily provide them access to the content that you have, and so on and so forth. If you're a research and education network, you need to be able to interconnect with other parts of the ecosystem and vice versa. And at the same time, we need policy and regulation to also play its role to create that enabling environment for all of this to work fairly well. So another question is, what about local content? How do we get that developed? That starts by trying to understand the content value chain, which basically starts with the content producers and owners or developers creating the content. Then it goes to the hosting component, which is basically getting the service providers and the data centers providing that infrastructure. And then you want it to be distributed both locally and regionally or sub-regionally. So you need the IXPs and the service regional so you need the internet exchange point, the service providers, cross-border interconnection for it to cross borders. Then you need the end users who will be consuming that content. But for you to be able to continue sustaining that, you need a way to be able to monetize that content, meaning getting paid for the content that you will be sending across or will be generating and being able to send through the distribution. If you're unable to monetize that content, then what happens is that you will probably be able to produce it the first time, but you'll not be able to sustain the continuous reproduction of fresh content, or just sustaining that in terms of paying the hosting providers or the distribution, the creators and the hosting providers for your content. And so that will sort of lead to the content being stale and eventually going offline. So there are many ways that you could try and trigger a snowball effect, which will lead to more content creation. And this will touch in many sectors that may exist in your local market. So for instance, starting with the public service, e-government is key because everyone needs that. Most people will need, whether it's to apply for your passport, driving license, birth certificate, you name it. So once that content starts going online, and then government starts trying to implement as a way for making sure that people can actually pay for those services, you're introducing e-payments and the policies around e-payments. And as government adopts that and starts to use that as an element of providing service delivery, then the other stakeholders and the other industries will follow suit, private sector will follow suit, and so on and so forth. So there's an opportunity for all the other sectors, whether it's the retail and financial sectors, to take their services online, the health and education sectors to take their services online, entertainment, and so on. A lot of them will suddenly be hinged and anchored by the internet, the presence of an internet exchange point, because that's where they go and interconnect and exchange traffic. And that then creates that whole ecosystem of service providers connecting to the exchange point, providing the digital infrastructure or the hosting infrastructure for the various sectors of industry, end users paying in one way or the other, whether they're the ones who own the content or end users who are sort of subscribing to the services for advertising and so on and so forth. So it creates an ecosystem around which you'll be able to get the content flowing. So finally, I really want to just touch on the community, because the community answers the how. How do we actually get this working? It really starts with the issue of getting everyone or mobilizing the community to a place where they can actually start discussing these issues more comprehensively. And as I said earlier, it's not just local, but open up to international actors as well, or stakeholders. When they come and join into that conversation, then they'll start bringing up those ideas in terms of what is really needed for collaboration, what is really needed to advance the ecosystem, what are the gaps, how do we address those issues? And this to me is, and to many other experts, will say that it is the key to seeing the sort of the bigger picture, or realizing that big impact that we are all hoping to see with respect to the issue of interconnection. So I'd like to stop there and happy to take any questions that you may have. Back to you, Jasper.
Thanks so much, Michuki. That was very, very important. You are noting aspects to do with the national research and education sector, where we were seeing a lot of institutions going on the cloud, but not so sure if this content is hosted locally. You also really talk about key issues which come to e-government. We were saying government can be one of the pioneering institutions to ensure that local content is developed, because there is demand in terms of government services across Africa. That's very important, Michuki. I think we'll come back to you for the questions in a few moments we have had from Bonnie and Keith. Maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Bonnie Mtengwa. You can come through with your presentations. Mr. Bonnie is with the Post and Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe. Come through, Mr. Bonnie.
Thank you, Jasper. Good afternoon, everyone. I take this opportunity and I thank you for having me on the forum. I'm not in the office, so I'm very sorry about the background where I am. Basically, when you're talking of internet exchange points, we are talking of one of the most critical resources that we have in an internet ecosystem. And as the regulator, we come from the point of, consumer access and affordability of service. And we believe as the regulator that an internet exchange point is one of the key infrastructure in an internet ecosystem. Remember, if we need to increase local content and the adoption of local content in a country, basically the content has to be cheaper to access. And internet exchange points actually give that opportunity, because when players are peering at an IX, they might pay a small fee to peer, but everything that they exchange there is exchanged free of charge most of the time. So by reducing that, the costs of exchanging traffic, eventually they pass on that cost saving to the customer, who are the local people. And also in IXP, in Zimbabwe, remember Zimbabwe is a landlocked country. We highly rely on our links to other countries. So basically, even if those links actually go down, we as a country, we are dependent on those links. But if we have functional internet exchange points, you will see that there are things that we can access or we can do, because obviously those things are in our country. We'll be able to access our financial services because obviously most of our banks are in Zimbabwe, and we'll be able to do our mobile money because obviously the mobile money providers are in Zimbabwe. So it is an important thing to have an IXP. Mr. Michuki and Nomsa talked about the willingness of the community to engage and to share experiences. And also one thing that is important is for the community to be willing to share traffic. We have seen in the past, obviously, infrastructure was sort of like a competitive advantage for operators. So the more the fiber that we have locally, the more base stations that we have was considered a competitive advantage. But now, in this day and age, it's no longer a competitive advantage, because there are now services that are now riding on that infrastructure that are now giving people a competitive advantage. So basically, operators now need to utilize things like IXPs to reduce their costs of exchanging traffic, so that they are actually going to be passing on that's cost saving to their customers. And also, when you're talking of IXPs, you will see that they increase security. We have got issues whereby people, when you're talking of security, when you're exchanging your traffic, for example, from our operator near to Terror One and going to Liquid, usually in the past, that traffic would go to South Africa and exchange at Johannesburg Internet Exchange. And most of the time, what will happen is we don't know what happens there on the traffic. Someone can have access to it. But if you are utilizing an IXP, for example, their traffic is locally, that traffic is local. It makes sure that it's in Zimbabwe. No one is actually intercepting it. It increases security. And latency-wise, an IXP improves our latency. And if we have got a functional IXP, we're able to attract content development networks that Mr. Michuki was talking about. You know, if we have got the CDNs, if we're able to attract CDNs, we are going to be able to have cheaper internet access, which will be able to allow our users to adopt internet. Basically, that's what I can say at the moment from POTRAZ. I'm very sorry about the background. I am at a place where there are people. Back to you, Jasper.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. I'm liking the aspects you're adding on this conversation. You're talking of internet shutdowns and the fact that Zimbabwe is a landlocked country, which means we're interdependent on our neighbors. We've got access to the CECOM, which means if anything happens in Mozambique, it means some of our leagues might be affected if anything happens in our neighboring countries. You also talk about issues to do with security, which are quite key. Definitely, when we are saying we need to promote local peering and also the establishment of a functional and internet exchange point. Maybe for now, if you can allow me to just have a minute from Keith before we start asking questions. If Keith is still there. Keith, are you still there? Or maybe I don't see much Keith, but maybe I think we can get straight into our questions. Maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Bonnie. In terms of our content, in terms of the statistics that are coming from POTRAZ, how much content is really generating locally, or how much do we have more traffic going outside the country? We've got more traffic coming into the country, and what is the effect on internet exchange points?
Thanks, Jasper, for the question. That one is a very key question. What we've observed, obviously, as POTRAZ, we only rely on statistics that we get from our operators. And during the start of the lockdowns, we saw that there was an increase in the use of our international links, transit links, because of two things: on homeschooling and also working from home. People were now mainly using Microsoft Azure, Zoom, and Cisco WebEx as their main services that we're consuming on the internet. So we saw a spike in the use of the international links and a drop in the consumption of local services. Actually, there was a drop in the amount of traffic that was being exchanged at the HIX, which is the other internet exchange. We did not manage to get other statistics from Zincs, but we also speculated that obviously the traffic reduced, but there was a drastic increase of maybe we were now consuming like 125 gigabits per second daily on our old transit links from Liquid, Tel 1 combined. So you see that the traffic actually increased going out because obviously we're now consuming a lot of external services. The problem being that in Zimbabwe, we have got fewer services that are online and people rely on outside services. And also we are hosting most of our content in foreign data centers. So eventually, if we are saying we are now using more of our technology, people are actually accessing more of the international traffic, which is a cause for concern. We believe if with interventions and also from the academia, from the government, we are supposed to increase the local content and be able to create our own local content here that people are consuming so that we do not rely on most of the time on international content and also do not put stress on our international links. Thank you, Jasper.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. I think I'll come to you, Madam Nomsa. We are hearing this aspect of the need of local content. But our question is, our countries, in your own experience, I know you work for Facebook and you look at the global picture of Africa. We have the data centers and also the pricing for hosting these applications. We've seen the increase in video. Everyone knows that video is what is trending these days. Our data centers structured in a way that is very much accessible and affordable for local content creators, or because I don't see a lot of people reading newspapers. Because of that, it means the content, the amount of space you need on the cloud is going to be huge. Whereas if you look at international organizations which offer the same hosting services abroad, it might be far much cheaper than operators. What is your take on that, note?
Yeah, I think what's particularly important is there even a platform? And once the answer is a yes, then there is actually nothing that stops that development and for local content providers to actually either invest in placing their content in an exchange point, or at least teaming up with the rest of the stakeholders to be heard. So at the end of the day, if you're creating content, the purpose of it is to place it in the hands of a consumer. And so I think what needs to be done is a lot of talk around this. It's actually very possible that right now someone has created some content, but they don't really know where to start from to actually start to think of placing that content in an exchange point, or to begin that conversation. So I think this is where forums like this are really important, and where we should keep talking about this until almost everyone sort of understands the importance of establishing and maintaining and keeping the IX sustainable. And as far as international content, there's a lot of, there is much interested in the same eyeballs as the local content providers. So the dynamics are not so different. It's just how to prepare yourself as an IXP to, I don't want to say attract, because in some cases it's not really about attracting, it's just about pulling in the content providers and having them hosting their content locally, rather than us having to go out to fetch it.
Thank you so much, Nomsa. I think it's very clear there. Maybe Michuki, I'll come to you. We're talking about infrastructure and community development project, which is underway, and you guys are working on it as ISOC. Maybe my question to you is, what's the business case for internet service providers in really peering locally in the costs that they are charged? Do they make sense? Over and above that, we also need to hear from your experience in the community. How has the community really accepted this issue of local peering? We've seen a lot of developments towards community networks, but do we have the skills to ensure that they can then develop and also promote the structures that have been sent in terms of peering and also local content?
Thank you, Jasper. And let me build on to the previous question, which you asked with respect to international traffic growth, because it really lends to the question that you've asked, whether it makes sense. So Bonnie mentioned that there was a dip in the traffic at the local internet exchange points during the pandemic and the lockdown. But that's not the case across other parts of the world. In fact, some countries, I think some of the large exchange points have seen traffic growth upwards of 10%. Some have even doubled the amount of traffic that they've seen across the internet exchange points. And why is this? So I'll give an example. Some countries have been able to attract content providers or software as a service provider networks that a lot of us tend to use. So, you know, if you think of most that offer mail platforms or enterprise solutions that, you know, that are used for collaborative tools for organizations, etc. So if those basically were connected to the local internet exchange point, and then what happened is that everyone started working from home, then you're seeing all these connections trying to go through the exchange point to connect directly to this service provider that is connected to the internet exchange point. And we saw an increase, and a number of the exchange points that saw that was because of that transition of people now trying to access these content networks or service provider networks from home, and that really led to an increase in the amount of traffic. Same thing that you know, the effect that was had on education or e-learning. Same thing happened on e-health, or at least people were trying to see their doctors online using various tools and platforms. So that led to the increase. So what does that mean to a service provider? So if you think about it from a service provider's perspective, at the very beginning, so let's look at a situation like in Zimbabwe, and I don't have the actual numbers, but probably 70 or 80% of the traffic that the users are trying to access, or the content that the users are trying to connect to, is actually outside Zimbabwe. So that means for all the revenue that they generate, they actually have to pay to cater for the 80% traffic. But if you were to reverse that, where 80% of the traffic would actually be available locally in Zimbabwe or in Harare for that matter, then it means that the investment on international capacity will be not at the levels as it is right now. So that means they will be making cost savings because they don't have to pay for as much if most of the traffic is actually being terminated locally. So at the very beginning, what we tend to see is as the percentage ratios start changing. So at the very beginning, when you have a new internet exchange point, traffic ratios will be about 10, 20% local, 80% international. It's not so much for them to be able to extend that cost saving benefit to the end user. So what you tend to see is that any savings made from that will lead, ISPs will use that to to invest in the network upgrades and infrastructure upgrades. So you will see that taking some time, and over some period of time, as the ratios start changing and increasing in favor of more locally available traffic, it will get to a point where some markets, like we've seen in South Africa, are beyond 80%. Kenya and Nigeria are upwards of 70%. And now at that point in time, you will see that benefit being extended to the end users. And what really tends to happen is that for the bandwidth that you are buying, and one of the example I use is that 10 years ago in Kenya, for about $100, I'll only be able to get about 2 megabits at most, 1.5 to 2 megabits. Today, 2021, for the same $100, I'm able to get 100 megabits. So as you can see over the time, yes, I'm still paying 100, you'll probably be still paying $100 per month, but the amount of bandwidth you're able to get is considerably much more than you actually got 10 years ago. And that's sort of how the situation evolves. And that's how service providers or internet service providers are able now to give a much better offering which will sort of cater for all types of users. Whether you need 5 megabit, now the price for 5 megabit will not be $100, but maybe $20 or something like that. So that's how it evolves. Now, from the capacity building point of view, basically, we have been working together with the service providers by offering them training in terms of the technical training, hands-on training for them to understand how to configure their networks and optimize them for the interconnection at the IXPs. We've also been able to support what we call network operator groups, which basically creates a local forum where the stakeholders can, and folks that have an interest in the technical ecosystem can actually come in and start having these discussions to sort of try and identify what the issues are, the challenges, and how to address them using a local approach. So we tend to support those local initiatives that will lead towards the development of the local internet ecosystem from the bottom up, not trying to do it from the top down. I hope that helps answer those two questions.
Thanks so much. I think it really answers a lot of questions. We want to appreciate really the good role we are seeing the Internet Society doing in terms of capacity building, because really, when we have the best engineers in Africa, because of the conditions, a lot of them, they tend to move away. So the training will always be needed. Maybe before I go to Bonnie, Keith, I'll give you a minute to just share your views on the Internet exchange point as an engineering consultant, your view and the roadmap that you think we can then be part of it and contribute towards the development of IXPs.
Yeah, sure. As highlighted by everybody else, introducing traffic to a local IXP will reduce the costs of connectivity for our end users and people in Zim. So bringing hosting local would help a lot with the people in Zimbabwe. If we were to move the CDNs and Facebook, Google, all of those caches to the IXPs, or to the IXP, since we only really have two, it would help in bringing down the cost of connectivity for subscribers. As we're well aware, most of the ISPs have their own caches on their own networks, and for the most part, connectivity to those isn't shared amongst all providers equally. So yeah, it would help us a lot if we were to bring that content to the IXP, reduce the number of caches in Zim, and pool our resources. We don't need 4 or 5 Google caches. We really need one for the country.
Oh, thank you so much, Keith. You're raising a very important issue there, that maybe the same cache that one service provider is paying for is the same for the other service provider. So at the end of the day, there are quite huge resources that are spent there. Maybe before coming, I'll go to Bonnie. Mr. Boni, talk to us about the case in Zimbabwe. We've seen a lot of internet service providers that internet exchange points that have been established in Africa and the world at large. What is Zimbabwe's position? In which direction are we going? And what is the current status quo? Is Mr. Boni there? I think maybe since he's traveling, you might have lost him because of connectivity. I think he's trying to connect. Apologies for that. I think he has just joined. Mr. Boni, I think you've just joined. Mr. Boni, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, I've got a bad network connection. I did not hear what you said.
Yes, I really appreciate it. I know you're traveling, and we are really really appreciate your presence here. I was saying that what is the Zimbabwe status quo in terms of internet exchange points? We've heard about other establishments across Africa, including Kenya, where we are seeing some 450 the ISPs really appearing on one IXP. What is the position with Zimbabwe, and what is the roadmap? Where are we going? Are we looking forward to anything in this regard?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question, Jasper. In Zimbabwe currently we have got 2 IXPs, Zincs and HIX. So the plan is for us to merge those 2, so that we make them into a 1 IXP. Then, when we are finished doing the upgrade, as POTRAZ, we plan to hand over the management of those 2 IXPs. We believe if the community is now managing them, definitely they'll be able to garner much traction and also be able to invite a lot of other institutions to peer. But obviously we have got prospective peers. Obviously for the 2 IXs will be the government and also the academia, because we have seen that none of those 2 institutions, the academia and the government, are appearing at the IXPs. So basically, I'm sure we might need to do a lot of campaigning to invite those institutions to peer at the IXPs. Currently, we've got low uptake in terms of the ones people who are appearing. At Zincs, I'm aware that they have got maybe quite a number of people who are appearing, but obviously they are mainly internet service providers, internet access providers. At HIX, it's mainly internet access providers, but we haven't managed to invite institutions that are outside the net telecommunication sector to peer. And also we haven't managed to actually attract people who are actually from outside Zimbabwe to be able to peer, except for, packet clearinghouse at the HIX. But basically, in terms of other countries that have got maybe 400 numbers that are over 400, they've got other institutions that are appearing, not necessarily the technical community, not necessarily the telecom sector. They've got content development CDNs, they've got academia, they have even maybe like broadcasting companies and stuff. So we need to look outside the telecom sector. So actually to be part of, maybe it will be the mandate of the management committee that will be running these 2 IXs to look outside the telecom sector to improve actually the performance of our internet exchange points as well in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Mr. Boni Mtengwa. Very, very important. Zimbabwe has got 2 internet exchange points that Zincs and so we're really looking forward to see the development of these establishments. Maybe I'll come to you, Michuki, before I also ask the same question to Nomsa and Kit. Maybe our panelists can also share their questions in the chat box and also raise their hand if they have a contribution. Michuki, where we are seeing these internet exchange points working, what content do you think is driving the establishment of such structures in the other parts of the world where you're seeing IXPs doing very well, which you can make as a recommendation for Zimbabwe? I'm not so sure if it really requires us maybe to ask for an MOU with a big international organization that offers the same service to come here and also host some service here. What is your recommendation and experience?
So 2 things really. The first one is an enabling environment. You need a really competitive enabling environment. You need multiple service providers that are offering fiber transport. You need multiple operators that are providing internet service provider business. You need an enabling environment that makes it possible for cross-border interconnection. So, Zimbabwe being landlocked, it means to get to the submarine cables or to cross to your neighbors, you would need competition. And, let me give an example for you to just see why this is important. According to telegeography, in South Africa, a 10 gig international capacity is about $3 per meg. So you're paying less than $15,000 thereabouts for our 10 gig IPT connection from South Africa to Europe. I don't know what the price is in Zimbabwe, but I can certainly tell you that if you look at Malawi, for instance, which is another landlocked country, the best deal we've been able to get is about this is for a 1 gig, was over about $80, nearly $100 per megabit, right? So that's over 2,000% increase between what it is in South Africa by the time it gets to Malawi. So that really will have an impact on what you pay for as an end user in Malawi, and similarly, what you pay for as an end user in Zim. And this really is just because of the cross-border interconnection, meaning what is the competition and what are the issues that are affecting the cost of capacity between South Africa, where it is $3, and by the time it gets to Harare. So that's key. If there is enough competition cross-border, if there are lots of fiber to the home providers, ISPs, etc., then that price will be competitive, because there's a bustling environment where competition, innovation, etc., is happening on the products and services that are available. The second thing is the community around the internet exchange point. We cannot overemphasize this. I mean, it is key, because that community is the one that's going to then be able to bring all these other stakeholders to the fold. Because Keith mentioned that you need one cache at the exchange point. I'll tell Keith, you need even better. You need the CDN itself. Right now, a good number of them are already in South Africa. So what we need them to do is extend their connections from South Africa and come and peer at the exchange point in Harare. Because what does that mean? It means the capacity that you're now paying for to send the traffic to them to South Africa, you'll be offloading that to them at the Hicks, right? Or Zincs, whichever name that they, so you'll be offloading that transport, that traffic onto their transport at the exchange point, and they will be responsible for backhauling it all the way to the closest data center that they have equipment. So think of it this way. The cache is only storing dynamic traffic that is static, not dynamic, right? So if it's video, it's a video that people are watching. But what about dynamic content, stuff that cannot be cached? It still means you have to go directly to where it is stored on the CDN's data center. And that could be in South Africa, that could be in Europe. But what if the CDN itself was able to carry it at their own cost from Zimbabwe all the way to the data center that has the information you're looking for? And that makes a certain percentage. In some networks, in some CDNs, that's the bulk of the traffic. And so bearing this in mind, the goal is really not to have more caches. Caches are great for performance, but you really want these CDNs or these networks to actually be peering directly at the exchange point. And this will only happen if it's cheaper for them to be able to buy transport from the closest point that they are, in this case, South Africa, to Harare. And a good way to look at it, or try and imagine what does that price point mean? So we need to look at our European partners. And in Europe, capacity between most cities. So if you're looking between Paris and London, Paris and Frankfurt, Paris and Amsterdam, Amsterdam and London, a 10 gig circuit is below $1,000 a month between those cities. So I can bet you, if you're able to get a 10 gig circuit between Joburg and Harare, I can guarantee you, well, NOMSA is here, but I don't want to speak for Facebook, but I can guarantee you, Facebook will really pay attention to, can we peer at the exchange point in Harare at that price? Because it makes business sense. But if it is thousands of dollars, they'll be like, no, it doesn't make business sense. So that's really where we need to be. So it's the environment, the enabling environment, and then the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michuki. I think I'll come to Keith and then Nomsa and then Bonnie, and then you come for the last round. Keith, your experience in consultancy, do you really see a lot of our African countries looking at Zimbabwe per se? I know you've got some experience in terms of investment in these infrastructures that are required, as you have had Michuki really talking about the cost of these links between Malawi and South Africa, which is over 2,500% indifferent, simply because maybe Malawi's location and maybe the route the traffic is going to take. But what is your perception on these? Do our people really understand the need for investments in terms of infrastructure, though the results might come later?
Sorry, Jasper, your question broke up there, bud. Could you repeat it?
Okay, I was saying that in terms of infrastructure investments, do you see our local service providers and all the stakeholders that are involved really a keen interest in really providing the funds to ensure that these internet exchange points that we have, and also including at the business case that we've had with Michuki, to bring other service providers to provide CDNs in this local environment feasible, or maybe most likely the experience is that whoever is trying to profiteer as soon as possible. How is your view on that?
I can't really comment for the providers what they want to do, but bringing traffic to the IXP is to their benefit and also not to their benefit. If traffic's local to the IXP, that's cutting into their transport costs, their transport revenue. So if, for example, Facebook traffic, if all of that was at the local IXP and people weren't paying for IP transit, I'm pretty sure that would affect the ISP's bottom line quite heavily. You probably find some resistance there from ISPs or IAPs rather.
Or really because of the business case from their end. Oh, that's Keith there with a very diverse view. Maybe I'll come to you, Nomsa. Maybe your experience in terms of infrastructure requirements and also the commitment by stakeholders to ensure that we really provide what is required, because at the end of the day, we are going to be talking about the infrastructure, who's going to be funding it, and how are we going to be really working together to ensure that the cost to the end user is actually low, at the same time not really profitable.
Okay, that's a really good question. And although I'm going to, my comment is not really based on Facebook per se, because I'm not representing Facebook in this discussion. It's always going to go back to the shared infrastructure, I think. So in my opinion, as long as we start to look at solutions that solve the infrastructure provision in the first place, and the cost compression of infrastructure provision, then a lot of the blocks that come above that start to get simplified. And you'll find that this is the investment that we are focusing on as Facebook, because that's what really makes sense. Once you have enough competition in the infrastructure space, then it becomes easier and simpler for all the other services and all the other providers to ride onto that. So you did mention, I think I was going to go back to the question you posed that Michuki answered about what's really working. I think infrastructure is one of them. And just to add on to that, community, we can't stress the significance. It's definitely a number one. There is no IXP that thrives without community and that cohesion. And so once you put all of those foundational blocks in place, then everything seems to sort of go towards the right direction. There's no right answer, and every market is different. So at the end, some of these are the ones that we see dominating as foundational blocks.
Thank you so much, Nomsa. You also bringing a very important aspect there in terms of tech. What I think we want to say something before we got to Bonnie. We want to ask Bonnie about the regulation and licensing, to say that is it really conducive for these discussions on the internet? Over to you. You can come to.
So yes, so Keith raised an important point, which is important for us to just spend a minute on. This is the resistance from, you call them IAPs, who are international access providers, who are likely to see a drop in their business. But I think this is a misconception. In fact, we've seen networks that have suffered business-wise for not embracing peering, and there are lots of other examples that can be shown where networks have actually lost their market share and opportunity just because of not embracing peering. So first and foremost, what does it mean when you're offloading traffic to a network? It means you have more international capacity to sell, right? It's like you have 1 gigabit to sell. You've only been selling it to a certain percentage of people. And then all of a sudden, you're still selling it and you're offloading all that traffic to someone who's decided, no, let me come and get it. It's like someone pays you to hold traffic, bananas from Murambinda all the way to Harare. And then someone comes and says, don't worry, I'll come and pick it, for you in Murambinda, but you carry the rest. But you've already been paid for it. So won't you be happy that you have extra capacity to sell? I, as an operator, will be super excited that, oh, I have extra capacity to sell because someone has decided, so I will sell more. I have more capacity to sell. And at the same time, it means I also can sell to the person who wants to come and get it, deliver their traffic. So instead of selling one way, because these are people who are selling from Harare into South Africa, I should be going and talking to these networks who are in South Africa and say, I can take you to Harare, as opposed to just waiting for the market in Harare to take over that capacity. You have capacity between Harare and South Africa. Why aren't you selling to networks that are in South Africa to come into Harare? Because when they do that, at first you have to upgrade your capacity because you don't even have enough. They will be asking for 10 gig. You only been having, you'll have maybe 40, 50 gigs. Two of them come and say, we want 40 gigs. You do not have sufficient capacity. So you have to buy more, upgrade that, sell it to them so that they can deliver. And then it offloads everything you had, because now you peer with them, you offload everything else everyone was buying, and then you still have more to sell. So anyone who's not looking at it from that perspective is really not looking at this business strategically on how they can grow their business. And I would want to spend time with them and just show them this, because every time we've done it, every network goes like, oh, wow, actually, this is something that really does affect our bottom line positively, not negatively.
Thanks so much, Michuki. I see, Nomsa, you want to add something before we go to Bonnie and Keith? I'm looking for Bonnie. You want to add something, Nomsa?
Yeah, Actually, it's a question which is related to what Michuki is just saying there. But before I actually ask the question, I like what Bonnie mentioned with regards talking about the government and the education, the academia joining the IXP. That's exciting news, and I'm really looking forward to that, because that's actually where these kind of things begin when we're talking about community. Anyway, my question actually is when transit providers, I think this is, I'm asking this because there's always that misconception. When transit providers hear about IXPs, do they feel happier, or they think that's a chunk of our dollars that's being taken away from us?
Thanks, Nomsa. Nomsa is asking a very important issue there. I don't know, Keith or Keith, if we can answer to Nomsa's question while he's waiting for Michuki. I think Bonnie's trying to be connected. He's traveling.
I can't answer for the IAPs.
But your opinion on that. What of your opinion? What do you think they would in your own experience and opinion?
With regards to the Zim market, I agree with the previous points where, yes, bringing an IXP in opens up more capacity for the IAP, but we're talking about Zim, which is a relatively small market. I don't think that it's going to make that much of a difference to them. The people that can afford connectivity, I don't think the volumes of more subscribers that they can add bolt onto their capacity will be as beneficial to their income as the transit capacity that they would have ordinarily sold. But I could be biased.
Okay, I can see Tawanda, you have your hand there. You can unmute your mic and have your contribution.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I think just stole the thunder there, but maybe to both Keith and Michuki's contribution, I'm gonna speak from a purchaser of IPT and say that there is resistance. To Keith's point, it's a very small market. So if let's take Google, for instance, allows me to offload 40% of my capacity at HIX, that's 40%. Either I'm going to save, or I'm going to then tell my current IPT providers that, okay, guys, I'm going to downgrade because I don't need the extra capacity. So, and because it's a small market, it's not that simple that I'll then just onward sell the new excess, 40% international IPT I've got. So I think that's I think the bind that the two major IPT providers in the country have is that if they encourage this, it will definitely bleed on their revenues. That I'm sure of.
Okay, thank you, Tawanda.
But the question here is, they're looking at it at the current prices of IPT, right? What if IPT was $3 a meg? What does that mean for you?
Tawanda, this is up to you.
You're saying, what if IPT was $3 a meg for me?
Yes, exactly.
As opposed to 40.
Yes.
it will make at a business level, that's a totally different conversation, Michuki.
No, and that's not the conversation you're having, because that's the conversation you should be having. Why is it not $3 a meg? Maybe $5, just because of holding it from South Africa. Why is it not $5?
Okay, so I'll give you a semi-hypothetical. I can buy one capacity in 1 gigabits at Terraco for argument's sake, let's say 50 cents a meg. To carry that capacity, so that's about $500 per gig. To carry that across from Terraco to Harare, regardless of what I'm using, that's going to cost me about $14,000. At a cost of 500 on the SA side, I have to put in that much in between. So somebody in the middle here is making money, and you can't walk up to that guy and say, why are you charging? Because there's not enough competition, to my mind, in between. Why are you charging so much per meg when, you know, IPT in South Africa, even at the top end, is maybe $50? You know, so that's at a country level. That's where maybe the conversation should be focusing. Is why do we have internally, and I'm not talking about, you know, people like BBI or whoever in SA. It's when it crosses the border to get to Harare from whichever border you're coming, it suddenly goes, you know, in the other direction.
Oh, so yeah, so that's a local issue. That is not something, I mean, think of it, that packet has left London to get to South Africa, and you're still able to get it at under $1 a meg. But just traveling, what is it, 1,000 kilometers?
Yeah.
About that, 1,200 to be exact.
It's unfortunate, you know. I'm trying to look for Bonnie. Bonnie seems to have lost the connectivity, but I think he would have given us a view from the regulator. Maybe also just a few sentiments to wrap up on this conversation. It's a great pleasure to be discussing about the internet exchange points today. We are joined with Nomsa, also with Michuki, and Bonnie. And Tawana is coming in with as an interested party in these developments that are coming your way. I think now I'll ask our panelists to give us some takeaways for the day. We've learned a lot of things, and we're hoping in our next conversation, we're going to see the pairing of zincs and hinks, at the same time having the regulator and the government push this initiative to ensure that at least someday, somehow, we can have these CDNs come to Harare, you know, and we have the internet very much affordable to the end user, because at the end of the day, we're saying, let's connect and connect it, considering that Zimbabwe is in Africa and is a third world economy. What it means our people might really struggle to have the money to pay this internet at this cost. But at the same time, the inequalities become so huge. Maybe I'll give it to, I'll end with the lady, because remember, we're honoring the ladies. I'll start with Keith. Maybe your party was Keith.
Sorry?
Your parting words, your takeaways from this conversation, and how you want to see the development of IXP in Zimbabwe.
I think the merger of Hicks and Zincs is a good move. We don't need to operate two independent internet exchanges. And the current path that you're taking to shift management of that to not a single provider or that NGO that you were talking about earlier, I think it is a good move. And hopefully POTRAZ can make some headway in getting the local caches to peer with the internet exchange directly.
Thank you so much, Keith Rose. That was Keith Rose. He's a consultancy in telecommunications engineering. I'll come to you, Michuki, your parting words. You know, we are going to be honored the ladies.
Thank you. I think one of the things which is very clear is that there is a need to look at the enabling environment and the community overall in Zimbabwe to try and address these barriers that really will unlock the opportunities that the exchange point can provide. So, you know, there's already an internet exchange point or two. The path, as Keith has mentioned, is key, but really realizing the full potential of, you know, of the exchange point that it can have on the economy, on the digital economy, for that matter, or the internet ecosystem, for that matter. I think we'll need a much further, you know, review looking at the you know, the enabling environment and the ecosystem and the community as a whole, just to really address those barriers, because as we can see clearly, they are going to be there, and if they remain, then those things that we like to see happening in terms of the, you know, CDNs coming in to peer, people investing in data centers and things like that, that is going to be still, you know, a far thought, because the environment will not be conducive enough for that to be, for the right kind of investments to be made. So it's all an ecosystem, and you cannot look at one and expect it to thrive in a silo. Unfortunately, exchange points thrive when the entire ecosystem is working collaboratively and in an enabling way that supports other stakeholders to grow as well.
Thank you so much, Michuki. We greatly appreciate your presence here and also the very important contributions you've had to our community. I'll go to our last keynote in terms of takeaways. Nomsa, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jasper. Thanks once again for inviting me. And I must say, the first time I even heard of an IXU was through Michuki. So it's always nice that we have champions amongst us in the community that we can rely on when it comes to expertise in this subject. And I think one of the most important thing is to consider, I think, things like the affordability, the availability, the readiness, and the relevance of both interconnectivity, and an IXP is part of that ecosystem. And once we are certain that we're starting to tick the boxes on how impactful all of this is starting to be realized in our communities and in the businesses we are running, then we still have a long way to go. But the most important thing and the happiest thing of all is we're starting to gain traction in terms of talking about it. And I think some of these conversations are what led HIX and Zincs to start talking and start to think of ways to collaborate. So that's what is important, which is going back to the firm foundation of having a community that wants the problem solved and wants to do it themselves. So I'm really optimistic and happy that this is happening. I think let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much, Nomsa. That was Nomsa Mwaenga, one of the few ladies in the tech industry who was actually sharing her contributions today as we're discussing about what are internet exchange points and why are they so important in Zimbabwe's ecosystem. But we've realized that the cost of internet that we're incurring is actually affected by not really implementing these internet exchange points as well as providing CDNs to the local community. And also, if you look at the budget by the government itself, it's unfortunate. One for panelists, Mr. Mtengwa for POTRAZ had some connection problems. They really talk about the digital economy, but this digital economy, for it to be accessible to those in the rural areas, it needs the price for the internet to be very much affordable. But it comes again to the CDNs. We talk about local content, we talk about really community networks, about community radios, but this content is produced and developed locally. So we're talking about data center establishments and also the provision of these cloud services, local services at a very much affordable pricing. We want to appreciate our panelists today. Today we're talking about internet exchange point. With Nomsa, I want to appreciate. Thank you so much for being with us. Mr. Michuki, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Keith Rose, Mr. Tawanda, and of course, Bonnie Mtengwa. It has been a great pleasure to have you on this Tech Talk series. I think next week we're going to be talking about something else in line with the internet exchange points. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Take care.